A water crisis is unfolding in the nation's southwest as the mighty Colorado River begins to dry up as a result of overconsumption and climate change. The federal government has called on 7 western states that rely on the river to come up with a plan for water cutbacks. But the states have failed to reach an agreement, and now the Department of Interior may need to step in. Theodore Cooke joins me now. He's the general manager of the Central Arizona Project, the state's largest renewable water supply. So, Ted, you warned of what's called a deadpool in the next 2 years. What is that, and what would the practical effect be?
Well, the deadpool is a term of art that refers to the reservoirs, the primary reservoirs, especially Lake Mead and Lake Powell, becoming so low that no water can move past the dam. So there's still some water left behind the dam, but it's below the outlet. That also will significantly reduce the amount of power that's available from a hydroelectric dam.
So is that a kind of a twofold problem? Less power from the hydroelectric dam, but then also less water flowing down the river that's needed for all the other reasons the water is needed in the river.
That's right, and I'm biased because I'm a water person, but I believe that both of those situations are acute, but the loss of water is more acute because there's no readily available place to go get more. Whereas the power, you can find more, it just takes money.
How did we get here?
Well, you mentioned a couple of them in your lead-in. Overconsumption, I would probably label that as over-allocation, which has led to overconsumption, and also climate change and drought. And the third piece I think that I would put in was that as part of the allocation, that there was not an accounting mechanism to account for losses like evaporation and seepage. So those three things compound with each other and are particularly the climate change and drought piece, have overtaken our ability to keep up with it and to take reductions.
And so what are the stakes? What happens if we get to this deadpool situation, or what's happening right now as a result of these issues?
Well, what's happening right now, and as you said earlier, that the United States has challenged the 7 states that use the Colorado River to come up with a solution. And it is not as if decades have gone by and nothing has happened. There have been some efforts, some quite heroic efforts to reduce use in the Colorado River Basin, but it has not been enough. It's been enough for a while, and then climate change impacts and so forth get worse, and we have to take another step, and it seems to happen more frequently and become more severe. The United States had asked the states last summer, you need to come up with a plan basically to double or triple the amount of savings that you are already incurring. And that was too heavy of a load for us to lift. Unfortunately, the United States did not have a stick. They said, well, if the states don't act, the United States will, but they really were not certain what their authorities to impose reductions on us were.
But does that mean, are we talking about decimation of farming, no drinking water? What are the practical effects for people who are trying to understand what this devastating situation would cause for regular people?
All of those things that you mentioned could happen because the Colorado River water is used for irrigation for crops. It is used for homes and businesses. A lot of it is used by Indian tribes, and all of those would be affected. Some areas of the 7 states area rely more than others on the Colorado River. For instance, here in Arizona, there are some areas of Arizona where there's groundwater that's available, or there's, for instance, the Salt River project is another big surface water project here in Arizona, and have that to fall back on, at least in part. But there are large agricultural districts. There are some areas of some cities that rely exclusively on Colorado River water. And if it gets cut back, or there is none for significant periods of time, there is no replacement supply.
And speaking of that replacement supply, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that normally the way the system would work is even if you had a huge snow and there was a lot of snowpack, that would, eventually make its way down to the river. But because of climate change, the land is drier, which means that the ability for the system to replenish itself, it's not just what's, moisture falling from the air. It's the system has been changed in other ways that makes it hard for it to replenish itself. Is that right?
That is correct. So drought typically refers to the phenomenon of having less precipitation. So we have had the drought, and the drought comes and goes, but we've been in a drought for about 20 years. The climate change part of hotter and drier conditions for the rest of the year outside of the snow accumulation and runoff period, which is from October to about April, does exactly what you say, is that the dirt, the soil is so dry that the runoff that we do get soaks into the ground and doesn't make it into rivers and streams and into the reservoirs. Or because the air is warmer, the snow sublimates. It doesn't melt at all. It just evaporates into water vapor.
And just finally, very quickly, what's going to happen next? What happens if they can't come up with an agreement, and how draconian, for lack of a better word, are measures going to have to be to reverse what's happening now?
Well, that is kind of up to us. The same 7 states that were not able to put together a plan this past summer. And as I mentioned, a part of that inability was there was no consequences, at least not immediately. The United States was not going to turn around and take some action of its own to reduce allocations. But last month, in November, the United States entered into a rulemaking process where they will reevaluate their authorities to do those things. So there is now a stick this time when the United States has said the states need to come up with a plan, or the United States is going to take some action. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to take some action. There's a deadline for the 7 states to come up with its own plan by the end of January, or the United States is going to take action. I think the states will come up with some part of a plan. I don't think we can do it all by ourselves, and the United States will have to make up the difference. But the U.S. plan, if they were left to their own actions, would not be as bad as a deadpool. They will not allow that to happen. They will protect certain levels in the reservoirs so that power can still be produced and water can get past the dam. But there will be long periods of time while these levels in the reservoirs are being protected, that they won't let any water out,
Theodore
even if
Cooke,
they could.
thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate all that information. Thank you.
Thank you.